Hello. It appears that you used me in an attempt to humiliate me in front of Mr. Solomon. However, just because of your little stunt, I will now read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Give it a second. Okay. We'll read for about 8 minutes today. Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged by archive.org. Part 1. Non-Contradiction. Chapter 1. The Theme. Who was John Galt? Or who is John Galt? The light was ebbing, and Eddie Willers could not distinguish the bum's face. The bum had said it simply, without expression. But from the sunset at the far end of the street, yellow glints caught his eyes, and his eyes looked straight at Eddie Willers, mocking and still, as if the question had been addressed to the causeless uneasiness within him. "Why did you say that?" asked Eddie Willers, his voice tense. The bum leaned against the side of the doorway. A wedge of broken glass behind him reflected the metal yellow of the sky. "Why does it bother you?" he asked. "It doesn't!" snapped Eddie Willers. He reached hastily into his pocket. The bum had stopped him and asked him for a dime, then had gone on talking as if to kill the moment and postpone the problem of the next. Pleas for dimes were so frequent in the streets that these days it was not necessary to listen to explanations, and he had no desire to hear the details of the bum's particular despair. "Go get your cup of coffee," he said, handing the dime to the shadow that had no face. "Thank you, sir," said the voice without interest, and then the face leaned forward for a moment. The face was wind-browned, cut by lines of weariness and cynical resignation. The eyes were intelligent. Eddie Willers walked on, wondering why he always felt it at this time of day, this sense of dread without reason. No, he thought, not dread. There's nothing to fear. Just an immense diffused apprehension, with no source or object. He had become accustomed to the feeling, but he could find no explanation for it. Yet the bum had spoken as if he knew that Eddie felt it, as if though that one should feel it, and more, as if he knew the reason. Eddie Willers put his shoulders straight in a conscientious self-discipline. He had to stop this, he thought. He was beginning to imagine things. Had he always felt it? He was 32 years old. He tried to think back. No, he hadn't. But he couldn't remember when it had started. The feeling came to him, suddenly, at random intervals, and now was becoming more frequent than ever. It's the twilight, he thought. I hate the twilight. The clouds and the shafts of the skyscrapers against them were turning brown, like an old painting in oil, the color of a fading masterpiece. The long streaks of grime ran from under the pinnacles down the slender, soot-eaten walls. High on the side of the tower there was a crack in the shape of the motionless lightning, the length of 10 stories. A jagged object cut the sky above the roofs. It was a half-spire, still holding the glow of the sunset. The gold leaf had since peeled off the other half. The glow was red, and still, like the reflection of a fire, not an active fire, but a dying one, which it is too late to stop. No, thought Eddie Willers, there's nothing disturbing in the sight of a city. It looked as it had always looked. He walked on, reminding himself that he was late in returning to the office. He did not like the task which he had to perform on his return, but it had to be done. So he did not attempt to delay it, but he made himself walk faster. He turned a corner, in the narrow space between the dark silhouettes of the two buildings, as in the cracks of a door. He saw the page of a gigantic calendar suspended in the sky. It was a calendar that the mayor of New York had created last year on the top of the building, so that citizens might tell the day of the month as they told the hours of the day, glancing up at the public tower. A white rectangle hung over the city, imparting the date to the men in the streets below. In the rusty light of the evening sunset, the rectangle said, September 2nd. Eddie Willers looked away. He had never liked the sight of that calendar. It disturbed him, in a manner he could not explain nor define. Frick. Yeah. He had thought that there was some phrase, a kind of quotation that expressed what the calendar seemed to suggest, but he could not recall it. He walked, groping for a sentence that hung in his mind as an empty shape. He could neither feel it nor dismiss it. He glanced back. The white rectangle stood above the roofs, saying in immobile finality. September 2nd. Eddie Eddie Willard shifted his glance down to the street, to a vegetable pushcart at the stoop of a brownstone house. He saw a pile of bright gold carrots and the fresh green of onions. He saw a clean white curtain blowing in an open window. He saw a bus turning a corner, expertly steered. He wondered why he felt reassured, and then why he felt the sudden inexplicable wish that these things were not left open, unprotected against this empty space above. When he came to Fifth Avenue, he kept his eyes on the windows of the stores he passed. There was nothing he needed or wished to buy, but he liked to see the display of goods, any goods, objects made by men, to be used by men. He enjoyed the sight of a prosperous street. Not more than every fourth one of the stores was out of business, its windows dark and empty. He did not know why he suddenly thought of the oak tree. Nothing had recalled it, but he thought of it and his childhood summers on the Taggart estate. He had spent most of his childhood with the Taggart children, and now he worked for them, and as his father and grandfather had worked for their father and their grandfather. The great oak tree had stood on the hill over the Hudson, in a lonely spot of the Taggart estate. Eddie Willers, age 7, liked to come and look at the tree. He'd stood there for hundreds of years, and he thought it would always stand there. Its roots clutched the hill like a fist with fingers sunk into the soil. He thought if a giant were to seize it by the top, he would not be able to uproot it, but would swing the tree and the whole of the earth with it, like a ball at the end of a string. He felt safe in the oak tree's presence. It was a thing that nothing could change or threaten. It was his greatest symbol of strength. One night, lightning struck the oak tree. Eddie saw it the next morning. It lay half broken, and he looked into the trunk, as into the mouth of a black tunnel. The trunk was an only empty shell. Its heart had rotted away a long time ago. There was nothing inside, just a thin and gray dust that was being dispersed by the whim of the faintest wind. The living power had gone, and the shape it had left had not been able to stand without it. Years later, he heard it said that the children should be protected from the shock, from their first knowledge of death, pain, or fear, but these had never scarred him. His shock came from when he stood very quietly, looking into the black hole of the trunk. It was an immense betrayal, the more terrible because he could not grasp what it had been betrayed. It was not himself, he knew, nor his trust. It was something else. He stood there for a while, making no sound. Then he walked back to the house. He never spoke about it to anyone, then or since. Eddie Willard shook his head as the screech of a rusty mechanism changing a traffic light stopped him on the edge of the curb. He felt angry at himself. There was no reason that he had to remember the oak tree tonight. It meant nothing to him any longer, only a faint tinge of sadness, and somewhere within him a drop of pain moving briefly and vanishing, like a raindrop on the glass of the window, its course in the shape of a question mark. He wanted no sadness attached to his childhood. He loved its memories. Any day of it he remembered now seemed flooded by still, brilliant sunlight. It seemed to him as if a few rays from it reached into his present. Not rays, more like pinpoint spotlights that gave an occasional moment's glitter to his job, to his lonely apartment, to the quiet, scrupulous progression of his existence. Oh, I can't talk today. He thought of a summer day when he was 10 years old. That day, in a clearing of woods, the one precious companion of his childhood told him what they would do when they grow up. The words were harsh and glowing like the sunlight. He listened in admiration and wonder. When he was asked what he wanted to do, he answered at once, "Whatever is right," and added, "You ought to do something great. I mean, the two of us together." "What?" she asked. He said, "I don't know." That's what we ought to find out. Not just what you said, not just the business and earning a living. Things like winning battles, or saving people out of fires, or climbing mountains. "What for?" she asked. He said, "The minister said last Sunday that we must always reach for the best within us. What do you suppose is the best within us?" "I don't know. We'll have to find out." She did not answer. She was looking away at the railroad track. Eddie Willard smiled. He had said, "Whatever is right," 22 years ago. He had kept that statement unchallenged ever since. The other questions had faded into his mind. He had been too busy to ask them. But he still thought it was self-evident that one had to do what was right. He had never learned how people could want to do otherwise. He had only learned that only they did it. It seemed simple and incomprehensible to him. Simple that things should be right, and incomprehensible that they weren't. He knew that they weren't. He thought of that as he turned a corner and came to the greatest building of Taggart Transcontinental. I think I'm going to leave it off like that for tonight. So, in conclusion, screw you, Annika. Goodbye.